Hello, teachers from Abeka. We are thrilled to be joining you today for a conversation about upper elementary literacy. Ladies, I'm so excited about this topic because if you boiled the goal of education down to just perhaps a handful of objectives, literacy would be really at the top of that list. We are in the business of producing literate individuals, lifelong learners, lifelong thinkers. So the subtitle, Developing Independent Thinkers, is really the key objective of literacy. So we're excited today to talk a little bit about literacy in the upper elementary, how you can work to develop it so that students can be independent thinkers. Let me introduce you to our team here from Abeka today. My name is Amy. I currently serve as the managing editor for Abeka's publishing team, our product development team. My heart is in the classroom. I taught 5th and 6th grade for 10 years, and then I was upper elementary principal for several years before transitioning over to Abeka's product development team. Tanya Harrington is here with us today. Tanya is the elementary product manager, so she works with a team of talented editors, designers, illustrators, proofers to bring these Abeka products to life in a way that we truly believe and hope that it makes it easy for you to make the educational experience amazing. I'm so thankful for Tanya's heart and skill. And speaking of heart and skill, I am also thankful for Julianne. Julianne is our team leader for our reading product development team, and I am thankful that she is here today to share some of her expertise of all that gets built into the Abeka reading products. Julianne, I think back to my own time in the classroom. You taught 5th grade as well.
Yes.
And I think I took for granted everything that was baked into those readers.
Absolutely.
I know I benefited from them. My students benefited from them. But wow, the effort that goes into making that reader be something that really produces a literate individual is amazing. It's supernatural. And I know you all would agree with that as we watch the Lord allow us to have the talent and the skill and the amazing team members to contribute to these products. So ladies, I'm not going to belabor the introduction anymore because I know you have a lot to share with us today. Let's jump right into this topic of literacy. And perhaps, Tanya, we should start out with a definition. What is literacy? What are we talking about today?
What is literacy? Literacy is the dictionary definition is the ability to read and write. Now, we all know that there is so much more than the basics of letters and their sounds and the decoding of words and the formation of letters and spelling of words. All of that plays into your basic literacy, but just like all those other subjects, you just scratch the surface in kindergarten and you keep layering on and growing. Literacy grows as well with the student, or it should. So we're going to move from just the basic ability to read and write and take it to the next step of comprehending and understanding, forming answers, giving that answer to that basic question back in the student's own words. And then we're going to continue to grow that to gain knowledge from what is being read, from what the students are reading, and they're going to think about it, and then they're going to express it in their own thoughts, as well as giving their opinion based on what they know, the facts that they've learned in their life experiences. Excuse me. And then it's ultimately based on that strong foundation, being able to defend their beliefs about any topic, whether that's political or personal or spiritual, based on fact, moral, spiritual matters, all of that, most importantly based on scripture. But so developing that world view, so that's just a growth of it, developing that world view, articulating their thoughts to defend their beliefs. So that's how literacy grows and deepens just the definition of what literacy is in education.
I think that list is so helpful, Tanya, because it does seem like a big, important thing when you start out to say it's my job It's my responsibility. It's my ministry to make sure that these students achieve an age-appropriate level of literacy by the time they walk out of my classroom. Teachers, you're facing that here in probably just 10 or 15 days. These precious students are going to walk out of your classroom, and you're going to be left in a very quiet room for a few minutes to just ponder, did I accomplish everything that I intended to this year? And while literacy can seem like such a big goal, you've really broken it down into some core objectives of that goal, and then also the idea that it develops over time.
It does.
You're not going to achieve it all in kindergarten, but you'll achieve an important foundation for it in kindergarten. You both taught kindergarten, so you're very familiar. I kind of ran from kindergarten thinking I don't want to be the ones responsible for teaching them the basics of reading and writing, but you thrived on that in the years that you taught kindergarten. And so I think that definition, those objectives, really helps boil down what we're talking about today, but also why we're talking about it. When you say at the end there that the goal is the development of a biblical worldview, the ability to articulate and defend your beliefs, that doesn't happen overnight. And it doesn't happen by just mixing together some ingredients and a cake pops out. I mean, there's some deliberate effort and intentional effort that goes into ensuring that this is being developed day after day, grade level after grade level. So how do we do that in our reading class? Let's go to the next step.
All right. So there is a progression to literacy. We've kind of already alluded to it. You're going to begin by learning to read in kindergarten. It follows that natural progression. There's going to be some overlap between these stages as we get into it, but your focus changes throughout the years. So you've got that K-2 where you're learning to read. Phonics is your main tool. If you're not using a phonics program, I suggest you get in, dig deep, and find out how important it is to teach reading using a phonics program. Phonics is the tool that produces lifelong readers and learners, really, because that phonics is that tool. We're giving them a toolbox. There are all kinds of things in phonics inside that toolbox that they can pull out the different tools of letter sounds and special sounds and syllables and root words and suffix and spelling and all those things that go into that phonics toolbox to decode words. And then we're going to take that tool, and the tool of phonics is to help develop independent readers. So we're going to go from learning to read to reading to learn. And so that 2nd through 4th grade, you're still going to occasionally pull out that phonics toolbox, but you're going to shift in your focus and in your thoughts. And you're going to use those tools that developed an independent reader to now help them enjoy reading. They should enjoy it. That was always my heart. I want you to leave kindergarten loving reading and picking up books and being excited about those. But we're going to use those tools to become independent thinkers. And so that's kind of where that transition begins to happen in 2nd to 3rd grade, or 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade. And then in 4th grade, you're going to kind of transition again to reading to attain knowledge. Now, that sounds big and different. And how is that different than reading to learn? But it really is, because you're using different tools. So we've got to give them a different toolbox.
Right.
They're still going to keep that phonics toolbox because they might need it someday when they're opening those medical textbooks. But we're gonna transition. We're going to give them more tools to use to unlock literacy even further.
I love how those three that you've given us, you acknowledge that there's overlap. I mean, you've got that even in the grade levels you've given there, but none of these are exclusive necessarily to just those grade levels, but it's really the emphasis that shifts.
Right.
So for upper elementary teachers like me who are watching with us today and are thinking, I don't really deal with the phonics a whole lot, you're right. You don't have to, probably, because somebody else laid the groundwork for that. But you're benefiting from that, and it is still a tool. Even if it's not one that you've taught extensively, it is still a tool you can pull out and you can help students with when the time comes. So none of those are exclusive to those grade levels. It's just there's a starting point, and then you build on that starting point.
So then the next kind of layer, because that's really what we're doing, is we're layering on. We're keeping that foundation and just building on top of it, is to produce readers who are thinkers. That's how they're attaining that knowledge, is attaining knowledge so that they can read, to analyze and respond, and then prove through evidence and sources in all of their subject areas through all walks of life. This is really 4th grade and beyond. We're giving them this toolkit that they'll use the rest of their lives.
You're right. And I've said this in other sessions that we've hosted before, but those skills of analyzing, responding, I mean, that so much describes what's even happened with the circumstances that we've all gone through in the last year with a pandemic, something that our generation had never experienced or navigated before. And as teachers, as administrators, as publishers, we've had to rethink, processes. We've had to rethink our own lifestyle, how we shop or how we provide for our family's needs. And so that is the life skill that they're going to walk away with. And little did we know that they were actually developing that in part in the reading class portion of our day. So I love the life skill. That's why we're developing independent thinkers, because we're building on those life skills.
So we've got to talk about what's in that toolbox. So what are those literary tools? So we're going to start with some pretty basics, those basic elements of main character, plot, setting, moral. You're going to start those back in kindergarten. And I was even thinking about it with your preschoolers, with your little bitties, whenever you pull them up on your lap and take a book, a picture book out, and you read them a story, you can ask them at the end, who is your story about? What's the name of that? Who our story was about. And they can tell you even as early as, a year and a half, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, they're already building that literary awareness that's going to build for years to come. And we'll talk through some main character things later, but you're going to see that list. If we could get the list put back up for them. That big list of literary terms is not comprehensive. These are just some of those tools that lay the foundation for those independent thinkers. How they're going to take apart what they read and how they're going to glean from what they read. It's really teaching them how to comprehend what they're reading, but for more than just a comprehension to regurgitate facts, but to own it and to know it and to personalize it and to be able to think through what they've just read. It's not a comprehensive list. You're not even going to touch on all of these elements every day or even every week in what you do in your classroom, but it's going to be something that you come back to frequently because there are so many important aspects of each of these, and they really do relate together very well. And
they build one upon another. So as you're transitioning from the learning to read stage to the reading to learn stage, at the end of that K through 2 process, you're equipping them with those tools, those literary concepts, and you're starting with the most basic. Now, like Tanya, like you mentioned, they already are familiar with those items, those concepts. They just don't have a name attached to them yet. So they wouldn't be familiar with the term plot, setting, moral, or main character. But by the time they're in 2nd grade, they're ready to start understanding the terms and identifying those things within a selection. So as they get into those basic literary elements, they're ready to discuss, they're ready to identify, they're ready to recognize them, and they're ready to do something more with them.
A couple of thoughts that I've had as we have prepared for this, as well as thinking to the traditional classroom, you're not leaving your roots. Even in 4th through 6th grade, you're still working on expression and comprehension and conversational pace and tone and all those skills for reading. They're still of utmost
They
importance.
are. That's part of the fluency that
Right.
is
Yes.
an element of
Yes.
literacy. So you're
Absolutely.
still going to focus on developing those because even our upper elementary students have varying degrees of proficiency
Right.
with their fluency. So we've got to meet them where they're at, help them to continue to improve. But that's not all we're focused on. And
No.
that's what you're saying is a traditional education provides a broad basis of knowledge, of learning, of skills to students. And so we don't spend that time just listening to one student after another read.
Right.
I love, Julianne, how you talked about too, that even at the youngest ages, Tanya, you mentioned it, even at 18 months, 2 years old, you can ask them some very basic questions about who was that story about? Where did that story take place? And you're exposing them to those literary elements long before you actually give them instruction and you name that literary element. But all of that is very intentional
Right.
in meeting that child at the age that they're at the literary development that they're at,
Right.
and then gradually bringing them along.
Right.
That's super.
So those concepts develop over that over those early years into even lessons learned. What can we learn from the story? Preschoolers even understand what can we learn from the story. What character traits can we practice? Can we emulate? And that is a big preschool.
It is. And it's big for Christian education, too.
Yes.
That's where your biblical worldview really starts to come in. And that's something that was traditional and expected across the board in education in general decades ago. We don't see it as commonly used these days. So it has become a distinctive differential advantage of Christian education many times as far as that character development, specifically in regard to biblical principles, is concerned.
Setting up the reader so that he understands there's a purpose in reading this selection. Sometimes it's just for enjoyment, but many times there is a lesson to be learned within the selection. That goes a long ways to preparing them for future, which we're going to get to talking about in a minute, in upper elementary, where they will end up what they should be looking for when they're reading. So very early on, we're planting the seeds for them to start digging in and discovering what's important in the selection. Why are we reading the section? What can we learn from this selection?
I know we won't spend a lot of time today talking about the speed and comprehension element of reading, though we could. It certainly could tie into this. But we don't just read for speed to read for speed. I think about students even taking speed drills. The goal was that they wanted to finish it. Well, I want you to get it right. So let's build accuracy and then we'll build speed.
Right.
I think that's what part of what you're alluding to is we've got to be able to glean. It doesn't matter how fast you can read something. If you walk away with nothing,
Right.
then what time, what value has there been in the time that you've invested? So we're going to teach them to walk away
Yes.
with a lot.
Yes. And knowing what they should have been looking for when they started to read.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
So as we look at those literary tools and that big toolbox that we're going to provide for them throughout the course of their elementary days, their elementary education career for them, we're looking at several things that are just wow. And I notice those elements of reading that also play into writing. So we're going to talk through some of that. Reading and writing go hand in hand.
Yes.
That is part of literacy, but it's more than put the pencil to the paper, form the letters right. It is putting our thoughts on paper. And so as teachers, we have the opportunity to create that safety in the classroom of expressing their thoughts. You're going to start that as early as kindergarten even.
Yes.
Before they can spell the words correctly, putting their thoughts on paper to tell a fun story or to write about what they did over the weekend. But as that grows, we're going to give them tools in reading that will help them in writing.
Absolutely.
Both creative writing as well as informational writings
Yes.
that they will have as well.
I think about, too, as you're talking about cross-subject integration, the emphasis in upper elementary in history and in science.
Yes.
In lower elementary, we're exposing them to history and science topics, but we're using it more so as another opportunity for them to read. As they get up into upper elementary science and history, we're really laying the foundation for some of those very specific high school science courses that they will take. So by deliberately including in our readers, not just narrative, fun, fictional selections to read. You've also intentionally included informative, nonfiction selections to, again, teach students how to glean from informative writing in areas such as science and history. So literacy doesn't just happen during my 5th grade reading class.
No.
Literacy is being developed really across the curriculum all day long.
Yes.
As long as we take those intentional opportunities to get them thinking.
Right.
It's not just us teaching all the time. We've got to provoke their thinking.
Right.
Great. The toolbox is broad and deep.
Yes, it is.
It is. Let's take one of those tools and let's look at how it develops through the years. So we've already talked about, let's choose main character.
Right.
And we've already talked about how even itty bitties can answer some of those questions. And let's talk through even what this would look like for a traditional approach.
So you're backing us up a couple grade levels from upper elementary and kind of showing us what's been done for us as upper elementary teachers before they even get to us. And I know I always took that for granted. I mean, I don't know what my students are going to know when they walk in, but boy, was I glad they didn't walk in a completely blank slate. They had some foundational learning. So bring us into upper elementary by talking us through how main character is approached grade level by grade level.
Well, and another idea too is that you don't know how many of your students who come in each year don't have the background that 75% of the children in your class have.
Yes.
And for those, you have to reteach. You've got to spend enough time to know that your class is with you. So anytime you're going to introduce a literary concept, you're going to want to make sure that you introduce it, that you go from what they know to what they don't know, and they can make a connection there, have a hook to hang their hat on, so to speak. So you're always going to want to introduce that new concept, and making it clear to them. And that can be done through reading, through reading to learn, even in the 2nd grade.
Sure.
So the main character, if you were going to introduce main character or any of the other elements, you would want to introduce it. You would want to teach it by showing an example of it. So they would read a story that really highlights the main character. And then to follow up that story, you would want to ask several questions. Now, we could call them recall questions, but they're really not recall questions. They are a high-level thinking question in order to evaluate that main character, but they're very simple, and any 2nd grader would be able to answer these questions based on what you just taught them about the main character. So how does the main character feel? What does he look like? How does he act? And what are some of the things that he says? Because that's going to give a 2nd grader clues to all those other actions that the main character does. And what about how do you reinforce that when you're finished? You can ask those review questions, engaging the students to have them give you the feedback. You can assess their comprehension of that concept. But then you can also have a fun activity, really, which will let you know how much that student has really gained from that discussion on main character. And go through the stories, go through your book, and allow them to write about their favorite character. And you'll find out how much of that information they have attached to their main character, how they've evaluated their favorite character from the book.
So that's another step in that progression. Itty bitties, we gave them exposure. Now that they're getting a little bit older, we're being a little more intentional in the instruction that we're giving them. And you're talking about assessment, which is usually informal assessment.
Exactly.
But you're asking questions, you're seeking responses, so you can determine whether or not your students are with you and developing those literacy skills that we're working so diligently to intentionally incorporate into the lesson. That's fantastic. I also love, too, how you're getting into questions that you said you might think they're recall questions, but they're really thinking questions. And that means that those questions may not always have an exact answer. Sometimes they will.
That's
I
right.
mean, the main character of the story is the main character of the story. But sometimes when you ask the students, how did that character feel?
Yes.
There might be a word in the story story like scared or excited that gives you a clue, but encourage the students to go beyond just what the text said to what you can infer from the text.
Yes.
And that means one child's answer may be a little bit different from another student's answer,
Right.
and that's okay. Now, we're not going so far to imply that any answer would be correct. I mean, that's a whole different philosophy of education. They do need to be able to support their answer with proofs from the story. You used the word prove earlier, Tanya. And so there's a great opportunity here to get students thinking independently and very individually. These aren't cookie cutter discussions.
Right.
They're open discussions for children to express what they're processing.
You're going to want to bring that topic back up and keep it in front of them. Keep them thinking about it throughout the year. It's the benefit of spiral review.
Yes.
Right.
And then you're going to do it from year to year.
Yes.
So then we talked about it in second grade. We're going to bring it back up again at the beginning of third grade, and we're going to go deeper with it.
Right.
Yes.
And keep going. So you're even asking, yes, you'll ask the basics, but then you're going to get to the point of how did
the character change from beginning to the end?
exactly.
What was it that influenced or impacted his change, which then leads to back full circle to why did the author write this story? You know, what was the intent? What lessons can we learn? And so each step of this is just really bringing to light more of what the student should be comprehending about the main character and his role in the plot.
We always want students to read for enjoyment, but it does go deeper than that. We ought to be changed, really, as a result of what we read.
Yes.
You know, whether we've been encouraged, whether we've been instructed, whether we've been challenged, we walk away with something different than what we had before we came to the story. So it makes reading time more valuable.
Definitely.
And it really should make it more enjoyable because I'm growing, I'm changing, I'm learning. I'm not just reading.
I'm not just reading and not thinking about what I'm reading so that I get to the end of the story and I don't know what it's about.
I'm investing myself
Right.
in this story.
I'm engaged in the story looking for a particular outcome.
As the teacher, it gives you the opportunity to guide those discussions so that through those characters in the stories, you're helping your students build and develop their biblical worldview.
I listened to a podcast not too long ago. I think you ladies listened to the same one that really talked about how different even your imagination is developed when reading than it is when watching. For instance, a movie where everything is depicted for you, not just the words which are spoken audibly, but also obviously the expression that you would hear in a movie or the visuals that you would see. But when you're reading a book, you're inventing all of that in your head. And so it really is growing and expanding a student's imagination, which is going to be so valuable, as you mentioned, Tanya, when they move from reading into the writing part of literacy. Because how many times did we have our students take out a piece of paper to start a journal entry or a creative writing assignment, and you have a couple that just sit there and stare at the blank page. You check on them. My son in second grade did this just the other day. I don't know what to write. Well, just start writing, and they have this fear that they're going to mess it up. And we're not going to mess it up. We just need to start articulating our thoughts, our beliefs, getting those things onto paper. But building that imagination through reading is really going to help support that.
And when they can imagine themselves as the main character, and there are some activities that you can build into really any selection that you're reading where they can imagine themselves as the main character. But we have a couple of examples here. The one goes back to analyzing the character, what he looks like, how he feels, and how does he change from the beginning to end. So then you're becoming, you're getting into the idea of imagining what that character went through and how did he change and how did he feel when that change occurred. Then we also have the example that's entitled there, Ella's Journal, where we can journal from the main character's perspective. So you're really getting into the shoes of the main character because you're then writing from first person instead of third person from your own perspective, which is a completely different writing. You could grab a dollar store journal really for each student, or, that can be part of their supply list or whatever. And they could have an activity at the end of any fiction, nonfiction story where the main character is really highlighting those traits, how did they feel, how did they act, did they change, and you can journal those main characters' thoughts and feelings. Some of them are written for them in the text, but then some of them, like you said, are inferred.
That's true. And I love, wow, how quickly we have climbed Bloom's ladder of taxonomy. I mean, we have only scratched the surface of recall. We very quickly have moved into analysis, evaluation, creation when they're writing for themselves and doing so, like you said, in a first person setting. So there's some guidelines, some restrictions. We're not just going to write. We're going to write this way, this style. And they've got the ability to do that in part because the selections that you've given them to read from in these readers are really good examples, solid examples of writing that you're exposing them to in their reading, but that is informing and developing their ability to write as well.
So that leads up into, really, we're getting into the upper elementary, and we're beginning that transition from, now we've gone from learning to read, and our phonics is our toolbox. Then we've transitioned into reading to learn. And we're starting to equip them with the tools of literary concepts in order to transition into the next phase, which is learning to acquire knowledge and analyze and evaluate, and so many more skills that they can learn with those as they add those tools to their own.
Absolutely. You go from looking at what did the main character, what did they look like, how did they feel, where were they, what were they thinking, what did they say, to thinking about the characters in your stories for what you can glean from them. And then even this character web that's on the screen now is, whoa, that's a whole lot more detailed than where we started. This is at the beginning of the story, character traits of the life of this person when they were young to when they were older, and then even proof within the text of what you've gleaned or what you noticed. And these are just some sample answers. This could be students could have lots of different answers based on that story and the life of that person. And when I look at this type of activity, I'm thinking, ooh, we are laying groundwork for research papers.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yes.
That proof, that support as we get into outlining, and for upper elementary teachers that might have taught junior high even before, know the value of getting them thinking about proving their statements with supports, even at this age. I was thinking about your point that in 4th through 6th grade, we really move into a very significant emphasis on reading to attain knowledge. That just makes sense, doesn't it? Because 3rd, 4th grade, that's when we start testing science and history.
Right.
So it all is blending together. It's all very intentional. Now, we've got the skill of reading. Now we're going to use it to build a body of knowledge. We don't know in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade what this child is going to become, what God is going to call them to do. And how many times have our upper elementary students asked us, why do I need to know that? Well, we don't know yet.
No.
But we're going to give you this broad body of knowledge exposure and expect you to start gleaning from it, because we know God could use it in an infinite number of ways in your future.
So we've taken main character and traced it through lower elementary to upper elementary, but we could sit here for another couple hours and we could do the same thing with the plot line for a story, for the setting, and just appreciating creative writing techniques and imagery, and just the beauty of so many classic authors and how they write, and those techniques which students will glean from these classic selections. So we could do the same thing. We could track all of the concepts, but we don't have the time to do that.
We don't, but all of those things that we've even talked about here have led us very naturally into a focus for text structures.
Right.
As adding the text structure tool to the toolbox.
I'm thinking too, before I forget it, I'm thinking specifically for fourth grade teachers using their most recent revision of Abeka's fourth grade reading, the richness of this content that's in the front of the teacher's editions, that's in the front of the curriculum. So if you want to dive deeper into things other than main character, there's a description for so many of these tools in the toolbox in the front of those products to equip the teacher. We can't teach what we don't know.
Right.
And so that'll really make sure we feel solid in each one of those literary tools as we step into the classroom and teach students how to add that tool to their toolbox.
But they can feel so confident in knowing that all of the groundwork has been laid up until the point where the students come into their classroom. Because they will be so familiar with all of those basic literary elements to a narrative, by the time we start talking about text structures, it's going to just all snap into place for the students very easily because they are familiar with those terms. They can recognize them in a selection. They can analyze them in a selection. And so just equipping them with a little more knowledge so that they can begin to unlock the key to, how do I study? How do I study?
Oh, that's so key in upper
So
elementary.
that's coming.
With our text structures.
Are you giving us a sneak peek here at what's coming new for fifth grade?
Yes.
So fifth grade teachers, if you wondered what's up with these new readers from Abeka for this coming school year, here's your sneak peek.
Right. So emerging fifth graders, they're going to know what a narrative text structure is. Fourth graders are going to be prepared to learn. Incoming fourth graders are going to be prepared to learn what a narrative text structure is because they already have all the elements and already know the elements of a narrative text structure. They know it's going to most often have a character, a main character, a setting, a plot, and most of the time a moral, unless you're just reading a silly story, which we have plenty of those too, don't we? We enjoy those too from time to time. But in that narrative text structure, they're going to then dig deeper into the different elements of that, and they're going to be able to recognize, okay, this is a narrative. I'm reading this either for enjoyment or I'm going to recognize the purpose for this selection. What was the author's intended purpose and what is the moral? Now, because they did learn about moral way back in second grade, it'll be easy for them to remember that it could be that this main character will be confronted with a problem that he will either solve himself or with another, a group of characters that'll help him solve it.
So how does learning text structures help a student?
Well,
what's the importance of that? How are they going to use that tool?
Well, starting with narrative, it's going to help them write stories because they're going to understand those elements that are necessary to write a narrative. They can recognize them, they can analyze them, they can begin to write them. So we have an example here of narrative text structure where it's taught and then it is reviewed.
So we're teaching it on the left.
We're teaching it.
Then
we're reviewing it. That's right. And then we're going to reinforce the concept with a writing exercise. So the first thing that they will want to determine is, what is my purpose? I am the author. I get to be the author of this narrative selection. What is my purpose? So I need to determine, if I'm just writing a silly story for fun, then I won't have a moral of the story. But for this one, what is the moral of your story? And that should be determined first. We have a story starter included as a sample in this narrative so that they aren't sitting there wondering what to write about, like what we were talking about a minute ago. I don't know what to write. Well, this may just spark some interest, spark some creativity that they have and get them moving. But before they start writing, we want them to plan. So we've got a graphic organizer for them so that they can visually plan What's my moral? What other characters do I want to include? And they may add those as their plot unfolds. So they're going to determine what the beginning of their plot is. What is the middle? Are they going to have a climax? And they know what a climax is. And how will it end? So if they plan those things in their graphic organizer, it gives them, it helps them in a couple ways. Some who may learn more easily with a visual will have that indelibly imprinted in their mind, so that when they come to a creative writing exercise, those boxes, maybe even with a castle on the top, you can quickly write boxes on a chalkboard or a smart board, whatever you might have, so that your student can plan his narrative with your creative writing exercises. I think we're going to include some templates in
Absolutely.
downloads.
There are on the website. There are free downloads at abeka.com/curriculum downloads.
So
free examples.
Right. So those can be used to help students plan their writing. So if they have that ability to organize their thoughts on paper, but also mentally, and they can visualize that, so that when they go to a writing exercise and they don't have that paper and pencil for planning, they can still plan that in their minds before they get started.
Yes.
Then they know where they're going to end up when they're writing a narrative.
I love how engaging you've designed this to be for the learner. You mentioned just the artistic element that makes it attractive to a visual learner. They get drawn in. The fact that a student wasn't just given a blank piece of paper. There's some organizational tips to get you started with writing. Julianne, I know your daughter's an accomplished author. Who knew? I don't imagine when she sat in her 5th or 6th grade class, she fancied herself an author one day. But she is a very accomplished author, and it was exercises like this that helped her at a young age probably start to organize her thoughts. She probably doesn't draw castles on her paper now, but certainly has learned to organize her thoughts, and now she's got whole novels as a result of that process.
Right. Yeah, so don't throw away your children's papers, because you'll find them years later and find the inspiration.
So that's how the tool of fiction, a narrative text structure,
right?
What it will help students. How about nonfiction? We're getting close on time.
Okay.
So
we gotta move.
We do, but this is what's so important, because unlocking the nonfiction elements is what helps our students become thinkers and take that thinking into their science class and their history class, and their health, and all of their other subjects.
So if you want to roll these out, Tanya, we can talk about the informative text structures that we're going to highlight. And it really is a reintroduction, because they are familiar with them from 4th grade. But the descriptive text structure is just going to help the students remember what they learned from fiction, transferring that to nonfiction, and identify the things that were important in the selection. So a selection that's about cats, that's the topic. It's about cats. A student will be taught to recognize very quickly that there are there's a topic, there are subtopics, and there are details that need to be recognized in that descriptive piece. So anytime they go to learn something, it's based on fact. It's based on the fact of that piece. Compare and contrast selections as well. There's facts that are presented for cats. There's facts that are presented for dogs. Let's compare and contrast those items, and then that's used so much in life for weighing out pros and cons, weighing out options, collaborating as a group, putting forth ideas and saying, hey, do you think we should move forward with this? Well, I have some concerns about that. So again, we're building life skills about comparing and contrasting. different ideas within a topic in a selection, and they're being trained to do that.
It's so good. I can see some of the wheels turning for our sixth grade teachers, because I can think back to my time in the sixth grade classroom where we wrote a compare and contrast essay. I think it was a seal and a walrus, or a sea lion and a walrus, something like that. And you're really, I mean, at that point, it is, lines on a piece of paper and something that you read and then you write. But you're giving them some graphic organizers earlier on to help them start to organize their thoughts and learn to think that way.
Yes.
And that word web.
Yes.
Wow. That's kind of taking apart the outline. So then whenever they're ready to write an outline, maybe they don't write their outline.
Roman numeral one, capital
exactly.
A. I mean, this is so engaging.
But they can organize their thoughts and see how the pieces come together to organize their thought for writing their pieces.
You're even making me think about that fifth grade mammal poster in science. I mean, you can see how even organizing the information this way first would really play out.
Helps you plan
the design of that project.
It also helps with the way we act, or our actions are based on what we believe to be true. And so these two coming up first, a descriptive selection or a comparing and contrasting selection, those skills are going to be skills that they're going to learn for life. They're going to act on what they believe to be true. So they've got to be able to recognize, this is information I can trust. This is information that I have evidence from the text to support these facts, these details. And then I can make decisions based on these things that I know. So another one that we'll cover is, another two that we'll cover. But it also is just a smooth transition into recognizing informative selections that have been written in order to communicate a cause and an effect, something that happened, an event that happened, and then consequences because of it. So
they're learning that, even they can learn that can be in fiction and in nonfiction.
Absolutely.
This makes me think history.
Yes. And so they will be taught and trained to recognize, oh, I see a major event happened here. What are the ramifications of that event? What was the influence? How did it affect the people? What was their behavior after this happened? And absolutely, we got to learn from history.
Yes.
So cause and effect. Also, problem and solution comes right after cause and effect, because many times problems come because of the effect of a cause. So it's just a domino effect. And then the students will understand, here's a problem that came as a result. How can we solve that problem? And again, history or science. And research. Discovery. Many of those academic subjects, they will be able to recognize selections, articles, chapters, paragraphs that are written in this text structure, and it will clue in the reader to what I need to be looking for. What type of information do I need to be looking for? Because I've been given these tools, these signals and triggers to recognize, hey, I need to be looking for a solution because they've just presented me with a problem in the text.
Reminds me too of the Bible 5 journal.
Yes.
And even in teaching Bible lessons, so much of what we can glean for profit in our lives is the cause and effect of
the biblical worldview, just the critical thinking skills that you are just so, I say effortlessly because I think it will be effortless on the part of the student.
Absolutely.
I think because of everything that's built into the curriculum, it can be with I hate to say minimal effort on the part of teachers, because I know teachers work really hard, but I also know that you've given the teachers lots of cues to get them thinking this way and helping their students think this way. So you're developing both that biblical worldview and the critical thinking skills, which are even hard to take apart.
Right. The last text structure that we'll talk about today, go ahead, Julianne.
Sequencing, which we've divided up into two areas. Sequencing, learning a process, so a step-by-step process, or seeing the events of something unfold in chronological order. So they will understand that is going to be very important to biographies, very important to research writing, very important to history. And because things happen in a chronological order, then they'll begin to see the cause and effects and the problems and the solutions unfolding in that chronological order. By learning sequencing, which we started in first grade.
They even do some of that way back in kindergarten.
Yes, they do. But by learning that sequencing and taking it up to this point, they will learn how to assemble. They will learn how to follow a manual and the job description. Things that you teach yourself. Everything is self-taught these days.
I'm hearing life skills.
Yes.
Again, these are the things that are going to benefit us forever. I'm thinking about consequential decisions as an adult. Voting, how will I vote on this amendment or this job opportunity that I have? If I take it, then this is the effect. If I don't take it, then this is the effect. But just teaching us to naturally follow that thought process. We're not going to just be victims of fate. God's got a plan for our lives, but he gives us the free will to make lots of decisions within that plan. And so you're helping them in non-consequential ways through a reading book to have developed that thought process.
Right.
It's very good.
Children don't naturally think about consequences.
They prefer not to.
They prefer not to. Unfortunately, consequences usually follow.
That's so true.
Good and bad.
So true.
Yeah.
Wow, what an exhaustive topic that we've had just a short time to talk about today. But it leaves me with a question, and that is, after thinking about the importance of developing independent thinkers through the literacy development opportunities that I have, not only in reading class, but across the curriculum, how does what we've talked about today make my classroom look different during reading time tomorrow or next year? How does my classroom look different than this year because of what I've gleaned from the conversation today? What are your thoughts?
I would say to keep in mind that balance is the key. Don't go into it thinking, I have to cover all of this. Choose a topic a week that you want to focus on. Choose a selection maybe that leans more toward one of those text structures and focus on that. Maybe choose classroom discussion is going to be a big tool in your teacher toolbox, because that's going to give you the opportunity for them to begin having that comfort level of expressing their thoughts, and you as the teacher can guide them back when they get astray. Whereas whenever they're on their own thinking, there's not going to be anyone unless they are listening to the Holy Spirit to guide them in the right path. So teach them how to go back to God's word, but that's going to take time. So don't think you have to have a deep discussion every day. Maybe choose a topic a week, preview the stories for that week. What's going to lead naturally to it? I think of Message of the Mountain that we're bringing from 6th grade down to 5th grade, some great biblical worldview opportunities. And some great discussion opportunities in that book that will be mainstream for them to read together and discuss in 5th grade. Take those opportunities, but you as the teacher have to plan it and give them opportunity to express, help them see the benefit and the good in other students' comments as well.
Oh, that's true. The collaborative opportunities are
endless.
Amazing. And that teaches such a life skill of valuing the opinions of others. Again, those opinions need to have a foundation of fact and truth, but we can have a different opinion and still value each other's opinion.
Go ahead.
Well, sorry. I was thinking too that, we're about ready to end the school year. And if you think, oh, my reading class wasn't very enjoyable this year, maybe it's not your favorite subject. Maybe you don't feel like you got the most out of reading time. I think a renewed knowing why we're doing what we're doing and what the goal is, what we want to accomplish, just kind of is inspiring. And it just renews that passion for the need for literacy and how far-reaching the opportunities are.
It's not one of those things that we're ever going to arrive at accomplished,
Right.
you know? So I could see bookmarking this video and watching it maybe August 1st again to just renew my enthusiasm for what's possible in the lives of my students this year. Tanya, you said balance was key. I was also envisioning raising the bar a little bit. We didn't get to talk a lot about it, but on one of those 5th grade pages that you showed, Julianne, I saw 3 different sections of questions. And some of them were more recall.
Yes.
Some of them dug a little bit deeper.
Right.
And one of them was specifically related to biblical worldview development. And when you first start, you may not get a whole lot farther than just the recall. But as your students are mastering the basic tool, then you take on that next, tool that adds some more skill.
Right.
And even on the exercises on those skill sheets, you were starting with recall questions.
Right.
Then you were digging deeper. Then you were helping them visualize and create their own writing as a result. So as teachers, our job is to almost imperceptibly just keep raising that bar so they stretch a little higher and achieve a little bit more than they thought possible. So I think our classrooms will look a little bit different after our conversation today. I imagine you're having the same thoughts I am, that wouldn't it be fun to step back in the classroom tomorrow and get to put some of this into practice, but we'll do it in the products so that you can step into the classroom and be amazing. Let me ask 2 other quick questions and give us just a short answer to each of these. What if my student is struggling just to read? Not even with the thinking part right now, but I just have a struggling reader in upper elementary.
Right.
What do I do?
I take them back to the basics.
So it's back to the science.
It really is. It's back to the letter sounds, special sounds, take them back to that phonics. If they're coming into your school and they were never given the phonics toolkit, they most likely are going to be a struggling reader. Now, some children just come by it naturally. They do. But that phonics is going to be where you're going to need to go back to. We have available the handbook for reading right now that would be the teacher edition, would give you some great tips. Find the student where they are, what do they know, and begin there.
I am watching my last child, number 6, learn to read in kindergarten, and I'm just as fascinated by it with my last one as I think I was with my first few, who were even learning it from knowing another language first. And so it really is a reliable science of learning to read with phonics.
Right.
And you make a great point that handbook for reading, though it is 6 simple steps to reading, it isn't relegated to just little ones. It can be used for students even in upper elementary.
The principles are the same.
Students who come into and English is not their first language, and many times come in upper elementary school. Also a great tool.
And if you take the time to lay that foundation, then you've got a more solid foundation to build their literacy skills on.
Yes.
We really need to stop and back up and lay that foundation.
Yes.
So what if my students can read well, but they struggle to think? Every time I ask them a question, the answer is, I don't know. And they slink back down in their seats and hope you move on to the next person. How do I help a student who's struggling to think for themselves?
Take them to what they do know and lead them to what they don't know.
Sure. So don't let them off the hook.
No. Ask them questions. Require them to think. They're going to respond in kind. Next time, when they know you're not going to accept the I don't know answer, then they're going to stay a little more engaged, or they're going to try.
Sure.
Sometimes it is a genuine I'm lost. So find where they are and help them through it. But for those that need that challenge, you've got to train their brain to think. So help them think through the process to get from where they are to where you need them to be.
Because that word independent is important.
Absolutely.
One day
Yes.
they're going to be the adult thinking for themselves.
Yes.
Nobody's going to be
Yes.
holding their hand. Nobody's going to be making the decisions for them. So our goal is to give them the skills to
Right.
think independently. So don't let them off the hook. Ask them some more questions. Help them see what they do know, and that gains the confidence that they need to keep developing their thinking skills. Ladies, it's been engaging to get to have this conversation with you today. I'm thankful for those teachers that were able to join us. Literacy is a big, important objective of education, but it can be achieved on an age-appropriate level through the spiral learning approach that is so vital to Abeka's success and can be done in our upper elementary classrooms as we finish out this school year and we already start to think and plan ahead for what we'll accomplish in the next school year. Thank you for joining us.